is the spectacular legend of the Colorado ghost towns of Alice and Yankee Hill and the state's first black marshal. Howdy there, I'm Zane Lewis, and today I'll be telling you the stories of two forgotten ghost towns in Colorado called Alice and Yankee Hill, which are surrounded by some beautiful mountains and St. Mary's Glacier. They were once fairly large mining camps with some of the rowdiest residents in the West, and today you can still see their remains, raw, untamed, and beautiful. How were these towns founded? What hardships did their residents suffer through? And what led to the rise of one of the best gunmen in the West? Well, while we don't have all the answers, using the various resources that we have, we'll rediscover the history of one of my favorite legends of Colorado. Alice's exact founding date is hard to trace, but it's believed that there were a few people who settled the area in the 1860s, finding some limited gold. Rich gold was found in 1881 by a group coming from Yankee Hill along a road that connected to both Central City and Georgetown. The town was named after Alice Taylor, the wife of a mining official. On August 24th, 1881, the Rocky Mountain newspaper, located in Denver, issued a report saying that Alice was a colony of 15 to 20 tents near another camp called Silver City. The most productive mine near the town was called the Alice Mine, which was started up in the 1880s. I believe it was part of the Alice Mining Company, whose superintendent was Colonel A.J. Cropsey, a man from Nebraska. It is believed that the company owned other mines in the area as well. In fact, the mine was making Cropsey so rich that every 2 weeks, at the First National Bank in Central City, he was banking sums of money ranging from $1,200 to $1,500, a stellar amount back then. Aside from the Alice mine, numerous other mines also sprang up around the area. Gold wasn't the only ore taken out of the earth at these mines. Silver and galena ores were also extracted, among various other ores. By February of 1882, the capital stock of the Alice Mining Company had risen from $1 million to over $2 million, a large stockpile of money at the time. To allow for hydraulic mining, a ditch was constructed to bring in the needed water. Log cabins and a mill were also built, while various much-needed improvements were made upon the 11-mile-long road to Idaho Springs. Every 2 weeks, the company was banking amounts of money in Idaho Springs ranging from $2,500 all the way to $3,000. Due to the success of hydraulic mining, Alice swallowed up Silver City, which had never become anything more than a lonely cluster of tents. Lode mining began to succeed placer mining as all the streams had been sufficiently mined out, a change that occurred particularly in the tunnels that led away from one particular pit, which had been ripped open by hydraulic hoses. In this excerpt from the December 22nd, 1894 issue of the Silver Standard newspaper, the paper described how wonderful and rich the ores at the Alice mine were. A very rich body of ore has been encountered in the Alice property at Yankee Hill, running from 40 to 50 ounces of gold per ton. It is also stated to be wonderfully rich in native silver. A piece of ore blown out was estimated to be 50% brittle silver, and so heavy that no man in the mine could lift it. If this report is true, it is one of the richest strikes made in the state this year, says the mining record. In 1903, the town's population, which had normally hovered at about 35 people, grew to 50 or 60 per historical records. It is quite possible that there were actually more people living there than that, and I don't believe that that number includes the miners living in the various boarding houses around the town, which would certainly raise the official number if they were to be included. In July of that year, the Aspen Weekly Times newspaper informed its readers that, quote, Sweeney, one of the old-timers here and for years the manager of the Alice mine, states that the property, covering 1,000 acres, has been sold to the Woods Investment Company for $500,000. In 1908, a more modern and efficient mill was constructed, and production went along steadily until it shut down in 1915 and the town was partially abandoned. With the Alice mine still in operation nearby, at least 4 people stayed at the town, including the E.J. Harpers. Mr. Harper was postmaster in 1904, and his wife apparently ran the building at some point, probably around the same time that he did. Likely due to how convenient it was, they actually ran the post office out of their home for a time, however stopped when it became too much of a hassle for them. Mrs. Harper also boarded miners and packed necessary lunches for them. In 1934, due to the rising price of gold, which had gone from being worth $20 to $35 an ounce, Alice, like many other Colorado mining camps, experienced a much-needed revival. New roofs were installed on the log cabins, the mill was restarted, and the town's most important pit was transformed into a real glory hole, aka a giant mining pit. Despite this resurgence, the Alice Post Office, which is believed to have opened for business in 1898, shut down in either 1938 or 1939, and sadly, the Alice mine shut down at around the same time, and the town itself faded into history. We know that at least $50,000 were brought out of the mines around Alice, a large sum of money back then, and that total is quite likely more, especially if you adjusted its worth in today's monetary system. Alice was the biggest mining camp along the Fall River between Georgetown and Central City. A lot of gold was brought out of the mines there. One resident of the mining camp was named Rosalie Galloway, who wrote a fair amount about what it was like growing up and living in the town. Her father even owned one of the mines at Alice. In her writings, she describes how every year, on the 4th of July, the Rocky Mountain Ski Club of Denver sponsored a ski tournament at St. Mary's Glacier, which received hundreds of attendants from not just Colorado, but from other states as well. She also recounts the beginning of the end of Alice when numerous cabins became deserted in 1921. 4 years later, in 1925, she moved to Idaho Springs to attend high school there, and Alice became just another pleasant memory for her. For anyone interested, I'll leave a link in the description to the article about her life at the town. It's quite a fascinating read. But overall, despite various attempts to save the town, and even though thousands of dollars worth of ores were brought out of the mountains surrounding it, even though many grew up at the place and made amazing memories there, and even though the camp is surrounded by some of the most beautiful scenery you will ever see, Alice has become yet another forgotten legend of Colorado. Located at an altitude of 11,500 feet on the mountains near Alice is the ghost town of Yankee Hill. Like Alice, not much is known about Yankee, but we know that people first began looking for gold there as early as 1860. By the early 1860s, the Russell brothers of Central City built a canal across the hill, which brought water from Fall River to Russell Gulch. The hill and eventual town were named by Northern sympathizers during the Civil War. It rapidly grew in the 1870s and 80s, gaining new residents and buildings such as a saloon, a stage stop, and numerous mining businesses. Situated between the towns of Georgetown and Central City, the site became a rather important stagecoach supply and rest stop along the road between the two towns. In the 1890s, a rich gold vein was discovered there, near the ground surface. Other veins of silver, copper, and iron ores were also found, causing numerous miners to dig prospect holes in an attempt to find minerals, as well as multiple mines to spring up. Soon after the discovery of the rich gold vein, a tent city sprang up, which ended up housing over 200 people. Within about 4 or 5 months of springing up, the tent city had disappeared as multiple log cabins were erected. In 1893, a post office was opened. On March 16th, 1899, the Daily News put out a publication saying that a 1/4 interest in the Stonewall mine had been sold to multiple Denver groups for $2,000. A new mining company was immediately formed with about $10,000 in working capital. On July 21st, 1899, the Denver Times reported that all of the cabins at the town were completely full. Some of the mining companies built their own quarters to house the miners who worked for them. One of them, the North Star Mine, had a rather large boarding house. Captain H.I. Seaman, who was a part of the Yankee Consolidated Company, had multiple cabins for miners and their families to live in. Yankee Hill was located within the boundaries of what became known as the Northwest Lincoln Mining District. Most of the mines received financial backing from people in Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, and California. A mining association was created early on in the newborn town's life. On May 14, 1900, the Denver Republican newspaper reported about the formation of the association as a way to fight claim jumpers and as a desperate attempt to advertise the hill. The latter attempt was desperate because there had been little paying ore brought out of the area in comparison to the amount of money spent there. Contrary to many Wild West towns, Yankee Hill was a peaceful and law-abiding place, but only after Marshal Willie Kennard, whom we'll learn about later, straightened things out. Whenever the men wanted to brawl amongst each other, which was normally once a month on payday, they traveled to Denver to enjoy the saloons, gambling halls, and love stores, despite Central City being just 7 miles away. There was only one saloon that actually did well in the town, and its beer bottles were small when compared to Denver, which served their drinks in 36-ounce glasses. The miners' pay wasn't particularly great at that time either. Yankee was incredibly cold during winter due to its high altitude. One day, on April 22nd, 1902, a stagecoach carrying passengers plus mail was caught up in a blizzard and ended up being 5 hours late. When the coach finally arrived at the hill, the driver had been sufficiently coated in ice and was freezing. Soon, construction began on an electric line to the area. While the building of the line was initially slow, it reached town on July 28, 1902, by being built through Fall River Canyon, having been financed by the Burlington Railroad Company. Given that the railroad never laid tracks to the town, their motives for funding this project are completely unknown. Just a year later, the Colorado Telephone Company built another electric line connecting to the town from the other side by installing the line in between the towns of Blackhawk and Apex, and then onwards from Apex over the mountains for the final 7 miles to Yankee Hill. Starting in 1905, work was performed upon the road through Alice and Fall River Canyon to facilitate shipments of ore to the refineries awaiting at the town of Idaho Springs. Many believe that a road to Idaho Springs would allow for the mined out ores to become more profitable, as it would be a shorter distance and cheaper to bring the ores to be refined at the many mills at the town. That was one major reason why the Fall River Canyon Road was improved. However, most of the owners and managers of the mills around Idaho Springs lived in the distant Gilpin County instead of Clear Creek County, the county that Idaho Springs belonged to, as well as Yankee Hill and Alice. Due to this, a majority of the refining was performed at the further away Blackhawk refineries. Even with factors such as weather against them, quite a few pioneers attempted to strike it rich at Yankee Hill. One mine, called the Gold Anchor Mine, produced ores that at the time were worth $600 per ton, albeit not for very long. In fact, the mine was doing so well that they built their own concentrator in 1905, and not far away, the Pioneer Mill was built as a 5-stamp operation at around the same time, due to the hype over the potential riches in the hill. The president of the Yankee Consolidated Mining, Milling, and Tunneling Company, Captain H.I. Seaman, whom I have previously mentioned, dug a new shaft on the Lombard property, which produced rich ores that were worth $400 per ton. The company employed between 50 to 100 men at the Lombard and purchased a horse-powered boiler, an air compressor, as well as new drills. In addition, it owned about 80 other properties around Yankee Hill, a select few of which produced silver. Seaman had his very own company-owned assay office in the town. There were numerous other mines and mining claims around the hill, such as the Pay Dirt Mine, owned by a man named Dr. Shaw. There was also the Eureka property, owned by George Ebert, and the North Star property, which was controlled by a man named Albert B. Sanford. All three of these mine owners lived in Denver. There was also the Seminole Group, which comprised a total of 5 claims. Speaking of which, the Eureka property reminds me of the ghost town of Eureka, located in the San Juan mountain range of Colorado, which was a very rich and beautiful area. It is actually my favorite ghost town, and I made my first ever documentary about it, which is some of my best work. Link is in the description and top right corner. Anyways, at some point between the top of Yankee Hill and Alice, the 94 tunnel was drilled and a small settlement sprang up around it. But sometime either at or shortly after 1905, almost all of the mines at Yankee Hill had shut down, and when the post office shut down in 1910, the town was abandoned, becoming yet another forgotten legend of Colorado. Undoubtedly, the most fascinating story about the town comes from its earlier days, and it involves a gunslinger named Willie Kennard, who, just like Yankee Hill, has become another forgotten Legend of Colorado. Willie Kennard was a black man who was born into slavery sometime around 1832. At an unknown date before the Civil War, he was freed from the horrible institution and joined the U.S. Army, where he is believed to have worked as a weapons expert for 25 years. During the Civil War, he served in the all-black 7th Illinois Rifle Company as a corporal. After his superiors realized the talent he posed with firearms, he was given a role as an instructor at the Montrose training camp. When the war ended, he joined the 9th Cavalry, another all-black unit, due to his inability to find a job as a civilian. He was stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas, for about 5 years, until he and his unit were relocated to Fort Davis in the Arizona Territory to help fight the Warm Springs and Mescalero Apache Indian tribes. Upon his enlistment expiring in 1874, when he was 42 years old, he traveled to Colorado, which at the time and until 1876, was still a territory. He drifted about for a few months before at some point in the year seeing an advertisement in the Rocky Mountain News about how the town of Yankee Hill was seeking a new marshal, paying $100 per month. The previous marshal had been shot and killed by a vicious, untamable outlaw named Barney Casewet. As a matter of fact, before putting the ad up, the town had gone through free sheriffs and free months. Casewet had been terrorizing the town for about 2 years, and his criminal activities came to a horrible climax in 1874 when he raped a 15-year-old girl named Bertie Campbell. The girl's father, a bookkeeper at the local bank, was outraged and attempted to avenge his traumatized daughter. However, Casewet shot and killed him. The town's marshal, a man named Craig, attempted to arrest him, however fell prey to his foe. A man named Ben Reed from Ruby Hill became the next marshal and immediately pursued Casewet. However, he too was shot dead by the fast and furious Barney. As for the third marshal that the town hired, he turned in his badge and left Yankee Hill just one night after watching the notorious outlaw gun down 2 saddle tramps. While the councilmen were desperate for a marshal, they never expected a black man to show up in answer to their advertisement. Mayor Matt Borden, who also owned the Square Deal General Store, was discussing the town's business with 4 other councilmen over a cup of coffee in Fat Sarah Palmer's cafe when Willie Kennard showed up and informed them he had read their ad. One of the councilmen quickly turned to him and said, "You mean you can read, boy?" Mayor Borden decided to test this unexpected candidate before hiring him. The test was to arrest the criminal, who was at that exact time currently playing poker in Gaylor's saloon. Kennard agreed, pinned on a star, and calmly walked over to the saloon. Another one of the councilmen, named Bert Corrigan, who was also a lawyer, later wrote in his autobiography called Mining Camp Lawyer, which was published in 1897 by Pruitt Bros of Los Angeles, that he was, quote, perplexed by this darky. He was either, I calculated, an impetuous bunghead, or as cold-blooded a gunslinger as I ever saw. With the others, I accompanied him to Gaylor's Saloon, a rowdy place which the miscreant, Barney Casewet, frequented. When Kennard told Casewet that he was under arrest, both Casewet and his comrades were totally amused. Casewet jokingly asked, "Am I supposed to come with you? Where are we supposed to go?" The future marshal then told him that it was his choice, either jail or hell, and Casewet knew he wasn't screwing around. He was also concerned by how Kennard wore his 2 revolvers, low and tied down, meaning he knew how to use them. However, the notorious criminal knew that if he surrendered, he would likely be hanged, and if he wasn't, his reputation would still be in the trash bin, as being arrested by a black man was quite an embarrassment to somebody with the reputation of Casewet in those days. He jumped up, ignoring his opponent's warnings to peaceably capitulate, and reached for his 2 Colt 44 pistols at his sides. But then, according to Councilman Corrigan, Kennard did something usually only heard about in legend, drawing his revolver and rapidly launching bullets into his enemy's still holstered pistols. This knocked the butts of the guns out of Casewet's hands and almost ripped the holsters from his gun belt, rendering his weapons useless. 2 of his comrades then tried to make a move to take out Kennard, however they were both shot dead with shots in between the eyes, with their guns barely clearing their leather holsters. Casewet instantly put his hands up, and the fight was over. Just like most other mining camps and towns of the West, justice was quick and decisive. The murderer's trial was held the very next day, with Corrigan presiding, as he was the only person in the town with knowledge of the law. The criminal was convicted of raping 15-year-old girl Bertie Campbell and sentenced to hang as a result. Instead of wasting money and time building a gallows, Corrigan instructed Kennard to nail a crossbar to an old pine tree behind a blacksmith shop owned by Glenn Ritchie. Casement was pulled 10 feet up from the ground. In a final desperate attempt to avoid death, he tried to save himself by wrapping his legs around the tree trunk and shinnying up it. This attempt failed, and he ended up prolonging his suffering by about 20 minutes. After that period of time, his leg strength failed, and he strangled to death. While Kennard's actions earned him the respect of the town's citizens, many were still unable to ditch their prejudices and grasp the concept of a black man as marshal. The manager of the Butterfield stage station, Reese Durham, challenged the lawman to a gunfight and was promptly shot dead. In the spring of 1875, the council asked the new marshal to go and round up a gang of criminals that had been preying upon the freight wagons and passenger stagecoaches around the Gold Trail. The 8-man team of criminals were led by hardened criminal Billy McGeorge, who had previously escaped from the Colorado Territorial Prison at Cannon City. Kennard thought it was best to set a trap rather than waste time chasing the gang throughout the territory. He nailed posters to trees offering a $50 dead or alive reward for McGeorge's capture. After discovering one of the posters, the criminal was enraged and made it a point to find Kennard, as every other marshal who had put up ads about him was offering $300 or more. On Monday, June 28, 1875, McGeorge along with his gang entered Yankee Hill by horse to get revenge for the marshal's insult. Willie became aware of their presence and went to meet them with a double-barreled shotgun loaded with buckshot at the end of Front Street. He demanded that the outlaws put down their weapons. One of the criminals, named Cash Downing, made the mistake of testing Kennard's skill with a gun and was killed. The lawman's shot also killed the outlaw behind Downing and wrecked the glass of the Evans hardware store. McGeorge proceeded to order his fellow outlaws to lay down their weapons. While being led off to the Hooskow, he vowed that he would get vengeance against the marshal, something which unfortunately for him would never happen. By 1877, thanks to Marshal Kennard, Yankee Hill became a very peaceful town, which it would remain for the remainder of its life. Its population began declining as the gold played out, and traffic through the town dropped due to mining in both Central City and Georgetown plummeting, although it would take until the early 1900s for the town to be completely abandoned. Shortly after taming the town, Kennard, who is believed to have been Colorado's first black lawman, decided to turn in his badge and said he was heading back east in search of a wife. After he resigned, not much is known of what he did afterwards. He resurfaced for a time in 1884 working as a bodyguard in Denver for Barney Ford, a former slave turned wealthy businessman who became known as the Black Baron of Colorado. The trail runs dry afterwards, and we have no ideas about what happened to Kennard after that, as there are no known pictures of him or record of his death and burial. While lawmen like Wyatt Earp and Bat Matterson are the ones who the history books remember, it was unknown locals like Willie Kennard who truly brought order to the West, changing the lives of their citizens and helping to pave the way for future civil rights advances. Overall, despite having once been a part of the lives of hundreds of people, Willie Kennard and the mining towns of Yankee Hill and Alice have, just like countless other people and places in the state, become forgotten legends of Colorado. So, what remains of Alice and Yankee Hill today? A fair amount, actually. To start with, along Fall River Road, which leads to Alice, accessible along the highway between the towns of Georgetown and Idaho Springs, there are the remains of some abandoned mines and a cabin structure. Upon arriving at Alice, you will find that people actually still live in the area. Some people have homes there, while there are also the Silver Lake condos and a few other businesses, all of which are a part of the community called St. Mary's, which I think was first founded in the early 2000s, and it covers much of what used to be Alice. If you travel around the town, you'll find remains of old buildings and mines from the glory days. Right by Silver Lake, there is a collapsed abandoned mine adit next to an ore bin. Just because of how beautiful its surroundings are, it's one of my all-time favorite abandoned mines. Seriously, nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, beats this scenery. Travel more of the town, and you'll find the small, quaint school, which is believed to have been established in 1906. It's been preserved and has some playground equipment for your kids to enjoy. Next to the school, on the other side of the street, you will find an abandoned building which I presume to have been a house, as it definitely gives off those pioneer log cabin vibes. Along another road, I found a very interesting and rusty excavator, definitely something I wasn't expecting to see. The large glory hole ripped open by mining was filled in sometime in the late 90s, and there is now a house on the property. There's also a mine claim along St. Mary's Glacier, where there is a collapsed adit and a piece of metal equipment left over from the mining days. I'll leave a link in the description to a video that talks about it. As for Yankee Hill, it is now a full-on ghost town, and a popular area for four-wheelers seeking an adventure. The remains of 2 cabins still exist, while various remains of other structures, most having something to do with mining, can be found. I myself have never been to Yankee Hill, only the nearby Alice. As a matter of fact, I had never even heard of the town until researching this video, originally just meant to be about Alice. Based off of the pictures I've seen of the place, and its fascinating history, I will no doubt need to pay it a visit someday. Overall, Alice and Yankee Hill have become 2 of the many forgotten ghost towns in Colorado, with much of their former town sites having been reclaimed by nature. Nevertheless, they left their magnificent mark on the history of Colorado. Hundreds of brave pioneers like Willie Kennard came to these towns seeking a better life. Whether it was prospecting for gold, exploring the Rockies, or rounding up criminals, the story of their residents is the story of the Wild West, and in many ways, the story of America. Hundreds moved to these towns with no idea what to expect. Some sought to strike it rich by mining and wandering the forests. Others tried to make a living by starting up a saloon or store. All of them wanted a better life. They helped pave the way for the world of all we know today, and I think that their legacy is something that will be remembered for years into the future. Yeah, these 2 towns left one heck of a legacy, didn't they? Not only did they provide hundreds of job opportunities, adventure, and a home to hundreds of people, they were surrounded by some absolutely gorgeous and unforgettable scenery. The miners who lived in these towns and built the many mines we still see today altered the course of this nation's history, and today you can still see their legacy, seeing America just as it was then, raw, untamed, rugged, and beautiful. I'm St. Louis. Thanks for watching.